Hello and welcome back to the wild, and today's review is all about the Fujifilm GFX 100S2, this incredible medium format camera right here by Fujifilm, and it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I've had the pleasure of using this over the last 4 weeks on and off. I used it 2 weeks abroad in Slovenia and then 2 weeks on and off again back in the UK, and I have loved every second with it. It's been wonderful. And this is my first time ever shooting with a medium format camera, and I've loved it on so many levels, which I'm gonna explain all about in this review. And just to put it out there, this is not a technical review. I do not do technical reviews. It's gonna be a user experience about using this camera in the field for how I would use it for my photography. That's what I'm gonna talk to you about with a touch, just a touch of technicality, not a lot because it bores me. But on that note anyway, let's get talking about this wonderful camera. Okay, to start off with, we're going to kick off with image quality and the performance of the GFX 100S2, because this is why we're looking at camera bodies. We want to know how they perform out doing photography. So we're going to start with that because I'm kind and nice. And I have to say, this camera body has performed fantastically, like outstanding. Like, I have been blown away of what I've got with this camera. And not just for like the looks, the vibe, everything, all the elements, which I will talk more about in a minute. And I think the main reason is one, is a medium format camera, as we've mentioned. That added a whole new realm and dimension to my photography, but also to the fact it has a 102 megapixel sensor, which is a beast. It is a power horse, and the quality and depth and resolution you can get from your images is just incredible. It's on another level, which I'm not used to because I shoot the XT series, which I adore and love, and it's still my equipment. And I'm filming on it right now. But yeah, the level resolution with the GFX series is just, it's a phenomenal. It's another level, which is just mind-blowing. So I've got a mixture of lenses and styles of photography and subjects to share and show you of what I've done with this, and it performed outstanding with everything. And as I've said, it's that perspective from the medium format. It's very different. And I don't know if it's just because with obviously crop sensor, cropped in as we say, but medium format, it gives it that more drawn back feeling. But because of that, the differentiation between foreground, background, subject, and all these things is just stunning, and it gives such a different just look to your image. And I've really enjoyed how my photography has changed with this camera body, and I've like noticed it, and I love the change that I've seen. It's been wonderful, and I'll show you everything I mean anyway, so you can get an idea. So with that 102 megapixel sensor, you get incredibly detailed images and files. The files themselves you can shoot in RAW, super fine, normal, fine, and a mixture of like RAW and super fine. And the files themselves are like 200 megabytes each, which is rather large, but as you can imagine, it's a 102 megapixel sensor. They're going to be large files, but it's great that you have the capacity and the capability to shoot in these different formats. So it's like JPEG or RAW, which is brilliant. The JPEG files are around 30 something megabytes, and the RAW file was 200 megabytes. So it's a pretty big file. But having that larger file is there for a reason. You've got a 102 megapixel sensor, you've got that resolution. So if you want to get a picture crispy, beautiful, clear, detailed, this is where it's at. That's why it's 200 megabytes, and it's worth it. It's worth every megabyte because it's just stunning. This was specifically useful and really good if you're doing landscape photography, because there was many scenes that I could either crop in but also see the landscape for like miles. And I'll give you examples of this because it was stunning for that, like so good. So overall image quality and what you can get from this camera is just outstanding. As I've said, I adored it. I've loved the style and the enhancement to my photography and the change in kind of the aspect of my photography as well because of the medium format. but the pictures, I literally cannot fault it. The quality is stunning. The crispness, the sharpness, the clarity, the refinement, the tones, the colors, the saturations are just beautiful. No softness on the edges, no chromatic aberrations, none of these things, vignetting. It was just perfect. They were just beautiful and perfect. I adore the new film simulations on this camera, which I think have been updated in all the other ones as well, which is the RØDE Ace, is that what it's called? Oh, I love it. I just shot on that like most of the time because I just loved it. So Fujifilm never disappoints me with its color science. I think it's stunning, but yeah, outstanding image quality. Yes. And thinking more broadly with this aspect as well with the high resolution files, when you shoot with your mechanical shutter, you can shoot at 40 ISO, which is so low. And I got to shoot that quite a few times and it's beautiful. And it's funny though, because like I was doing photos of the bears in Slovenia, I was doing brown bear photography. They were in a dark lit forest. It was gloomy and I had to actually bump the ISO a lot high, like over 3000, a lot higher, which made me feel quite uncomfortable because I don't like shooting with a high ISO, especially when something's got 40. You're just like, I want to shoot with a lower one. So having those bigger files, like you can draw into Lightroom so much information that the noise doesn't matter. Like you can use the denoise software in Lightroom is what I normally use. I don't have an external one I use because I don't like them. I think Lightroom's got it quite good with their denoise. Don't use it all the time, but for stuff like the bear photography, I used it. Which worked fantastically, and I was amazed that when I used the denoise, how sharp and clear the images still were, and I could still crop them in like loads. So that was like, I was quite taken aback in a good way with that. I was like, wow, that's decent. So I think having that high resolution really helps. The only thing I did notice is I have a old 2019 MacBook Pro, so not the newer ones with the Neo chip, but I found the denoise with my bear photos to be quite slow at processing on my laptop. That was the only thing. It just took a long time, like 2 minutes to denoise like one image was like, oh, it's quite slow, but that is my laptop. It is an older one. So if you do have an older laptop, it might be just something to bear in mind if you're using the GFX system. The files are big and they do take a lot of processing on your computer. Just something to bear in mind. But apart from that, it was fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the build and handling. And one of the main things I love when I picked up this camera was this textured outer. It is so nice. It's so grippy, so good to use, and it's just easy in the hand. You don't feel like you're gonna drop it. And I wish Fuji would use this for all their camera bodies because it is so robust and it actually makes the camera feel a lot more solid and stable, which it is, which I love. So it's a robust, solid, sturdy camera and a very simplistic style, which is great. And actually, I found the style to be a kind of an amalgamation between the XT series and the XH2S series and all that jazz, because you've got a similar screen and dial. I don't know which one came out first, so this might be the other way around, but it felt like it was a mashup anyway. Like, it was very familiar to pick up. And that's one thing I will say about the Fujifilm series of cameras is they're all very easy just to pick up and use. They've got the same interface that's on the system and mostly the same buttons. So I never find it confusing to shoot between the different camera bodies. And I've shot now with the X-T30 Mark II, X-T5, X-H2S, X-H2, and my X-T3, and now the GFX series. So picking them all up is actually quite easy to transfer between them all, which I think is fantastic. I love all the custom dial buttons you have on this side, which you have customs 1 to 6, which is wonderful. And then you flick the switch to movie, and then you also have the same custom 1 to 6. So it's really good that you can change and save your preset modes, so it's easy of use when you're using it, and that's been fantastic. I love that on my X-H2S, X-H2, and I love it on this camera as well. It's wonderful. You also have your function button options and your Q button as well. I make use of all of those and they all worked wonderfully. So I love my buttons, I love them. The only thing I did find a little bit tricky to use was this little joystick thing. I found it quite tricky to navigate sometimes. I actually prefer a D-pad, but I think that's what they're called, the more buttons there. But that's just personal preference. But I have that on my X-H2S and X-H2. That works better for me personally, but I find the little joystick sometimes a little bit tricky. The camera body itself is weather sealed. All these little compartments have a little water sealing around them. I have been in a butterfly house that was quite steamy and the camera seemed to hold up well. I've been in the rain, everything's working fine so far. So that's good. You also have your LCD screen on the back, which has had some upgrades apparently from the last one. I'll put the details below. But I did find, this was the only thing, when I was taking pictures, I know this is in JPEG format, but I take a picture and I look at it, I'm like, oh, I don't think that looks sharp. And it wasn't until I drew it into my laptop, then I was like, oh, it's really crisp, it's really clear. So I think the LCD screen can't match the resolution that's of the images, which is fine, understandably. So if you think your images aren't great, just wait till you get to your laptop. It's not like it was bad, don't get me wrong. It just wasn't as sharp as it would be as the main image. But it's just something to bear in mind. And also with this LCD screen, it isn't fully articulated like the XH2 and XH2S. It's just this way, out this way, and then you could bring it out that way, which is great for photography. It's really handy. I did miss my fully articulated because I do a lot of vlogging, self-portrait photography and filming, but this worked just as fine as well. The batteries, I have to speak about this because I love this. The batteries in this camera are exactly the same for the XH2S and the XH2, and I believe the X-T5 as well. I love that about Fuji. Keep it all the same. So if you do want to transition between camera bodies, you can easily. You don't have to buy a whole new set of batteries. They're all the same. So I love that. It was really good. And also the battery life lasted a hell of a long time, which I was really impressed with as well. Like I did all day shooting of bears, of photography and filming and stuff. I mean, not all day constantly on, but I'd only go through like 1 or 2 batteries maximum. So yeah, I was pretty impressed with that. I thought it was really decent. And my final point is, one, about the price, which is £4,999, currently sat in the UK anyway. But I'll talk more about this at the end, but I just want to put that out there now. And my other point I wanted to make finally is the size of this camera body, because it is quite chunky. As you can see, it's got quite a large sensor hole because it is a big sensor, it's the medium format. But at the same time, I am 5'3", I'm a very petite person. I carried this up mountains, I've carried it through forests and everywhere. I've carried it in my hand with just the 500mm holding the tripod foot mount, and it was fine. It did great. So as much as it is heavy and bulky, it doesn't feel like that to hand. It's quite distributed well. And if I can hold it as a weenie, it'd be fine. But yeah, it is a bit bigger. It's not your pocket size XT series, which is fantastic for travel photography. If you're looking for something a bit more portable, it's not just the camera body, it's the lenses attached to it are quite big. So that's just something to bear in mind. If you want something portable, maybe not. But in terms of like taking it out, like I said, I went to numerous places and it did fine. So it just depends what you're after, but it did do well. So overall for build quality, I think it's fantastic. It's sturdy, it's got all the function buttons you need, and it did really great. And actually it's not got one mark on it at all. And I've taken this a lot of places, so it's done really, really well. Okay, so the next point we're going to talk about is filming with the GFX 100S2. And I love that Fujifilm have given you the capability to film with this camera, because I don't think, could be wrong, but I don't think it's necessarily a filming orientated camera. I feel like it's more angled at photography, which is fine. But I love that Fuji have enabled you to use it for filming if you wish to, because I think for the price, in my opinion, you should have the option of both. It's just my perspective. Okay, so what can you do with this camera body in filming wise? So you can film up to 30 frames or 29.97 frames in 4K, and then you can shoot up to 60 frames in full HD. And they are your 2 main options, which has been fine. And actually the footage, which I will show you in a minute, that I got with this camera body for both 60 frames and 30 frames 4K full HD did fantastic. It was beautiful. You also have the option of shooting in H.264, H.265, 8-bit, 10-bit, and also all your film simulations that you get with your photography, but also F-Log and F-Log 2. So it's great to have all those options. I just found it very hard because I don't have a handheld gimbal, and to shoot in normal frames without a gimbal, it gets a bit like juddy everywhere, or jerky, I should say. And coming from someone, now this is a personal perspective, coming from someone who loves slow motion filming and that kind of magical vibe you get from slow motion filming, I really did miss having that option to film that on this camera. As I said, that's a personal perspective because I understand, as I've mentioned, I think this is mainly for photography. Not everyone cares about filming, which is absolutely fine. And if you're not bothered, yeah, it's great for photography. As I've mentioned, it's fantastic, in fact. But for filming, I just really missed having that 120p. So yes, that's the only thing I did miss, but then I'm just being spoiled because I want everything in one camera. But again, the price point, I kind of feel like it should include something at 120p. just my opinion on it. But with the filming I did get with it in, as I said, 60 frames, 30 frames, 4K Full HD, it did perform wonderfully. And I'll give you all the examples of what I mean. And you can get an idea of what filming you can do with this camera body. Enjoy. Okay, so let's talk about the shooting modes with the 100S2 because it's an important point. But first, I'll just brush upon the types of shutter modes you have, which is your electronic shutter, mechanical shutter, curtain shutter, and then a variation of all different shutters. And these variations or different types of shutters make a difference to what shooting mode you can use when shooting with this camera. For example, say your high burst mode, you have the option of 7 frames per second or 5. 7 frames you can do in your mechanical shutter, but not with your electronic shutter. So it's just things like this that differentiate what you can use with the shutter with the different burst modes. And in terms of your drive settings, you have your bracketing modes, your pixel shift mode, and some other different modes, which, to be honest, I didn't actually use a lot of them. I didn't have the time or the situation, but I mainly shot in either burst modes, your high burst modes, bracketed I did try, but not a lot of, I'm not really too fussed about that, and just your single frame mode, but there are the other options as well, as I discussed. So as mentioned already, you have your high speed burst, which is your 7 or 5 frames, and then you also have your low speed burst, which is 2 frames per second, and that is something we will come back to in a minute. So this is where I'm going to talk about my noticeable differences between the X series and GFX series, because I think it's quite important to talk about. So coming from the X series for a long time, as I said, 5 years, and then moving to the GFX series just now, temporary, I'm just borrowing this, it's not mine. But I noticed the speed difference between the series, and what do I mean with that? I find the X series to be nippy, fast-paced. The buttons, the design, the whole shooting modes that you can do up to 20 frames per second, whereas the GFX series is a slower paced camera. It just takes more time, but it doesn't mean that's necessarily a bad thing, and I'll come to this in a second. So yes, it is noticeably slower, but this I think is for a reason. One, 200 megabytes of file. If you had that 20 frames per second at 200 megabytes of file, I think it'd explode. That's just like so much data in 1 second. So I can understand why that's not maybe achievable. And then the other point is, which I actually really liked, was the perspective on photography. Now, I think cameras nowadays are getting faster and faster and faster, and you have like this machine gun mode, which has its place if you're doing wildlife photography, sports photography, or just general fast moving photography. But actually having a slower camera, which it wasn't in machine gun mode, gave me more of a mindful practice in my photography, in that I will shoot a bit slower. I won't always take a picture every second just to get the shot, because I know it's going to cram up my hard drive with 200 megabyte files. So actually the shift in mindset, having bigger files and slightly slower, meant I was more mindful in my approach to my photography, just took my time more and just thought about more with my setup and what I wanted to get and what picture I wanted, and not just to blindly constantly take pictures. So I really liked that perspective. And finally, the 7 frames per second or 5 frames per second. So when I did the bear photography, I didn't find it too slow. I actually think it was fine. And with the electronic shutter, because it had to be silent, I only could shoot in 5 frames per second, but I didn't miss any shots. I got everything I needed to get. So again, yes, it is technically slower, but it didn't feel slower when I was in the moment taking the pictures, if that makes sense. And just on a side note, you also have other options, obviously, with your self timer and then your interval shooting, which is really handy for someone like me that does self-portrait photography. I use that a lot, so that was really good as well. So it's funny, when I first picked up this camera, I remember thinking, oh, this is so cumbersome and slow, because that's what initially it felt like to me. But after practicing with it more and using it more, I love the style of photography and the way I shoot with this camera, and just the shift and change I've had in my photography in general. So, and now I don't find it like cumbersome or slow or chunky. I find it actually quite streamlined and sensible is the only way I can describe it. It's a nice camera for that. So it's funny how just using something can give you a shift in your photography and perspective. But yes, if you are someone that wants to do super duper duper fast paced photography of, like, I don't know, cheetahs running or Formula 1 cars going past really fast, maybe the burst mode won't be enough for you. I don't know. I'd have to test it in that kind of setting. Maybe it will be, I don't know. But it's just to bear that in mind. The maximum is your 7 frames per second. And I hope I've explained that well and not just spoke loads. But yeah, overall, I was really pleased with the shooting mode and what you get with the camera. Okay, so let's talk about focusing. And I love with this camera that you have the option to flick between your different types of focusing modes at the literally flick of a button. I've really missed this, and I love having just be able to flick there for manual, because on my X-H2S you don't have that option. You have to go onto the D-pad as I've set it up, but I love being able to flick it on here, and it's been wonderful for that. And in terms of focusing with this camera, it has been so responsive and so fast and so smooth. I cannot fault it. You have the option for your AI subject tracking, which is mammals, planes, birds, all this jazz. You have human eye tracking, and then you also have your wide subject tracking in general, your spot focus, and also your auto custom focus settings as well. So you've got a good mixed bag of focusing. And as I always say to people, you have to make sure you adjust your focus settings, especially autofocus, to your subject and specific scenario. I think a lot of people just want to shoot the same settings everywhere you go. That's not how it works. But if you adjust this, like I've done in scenes and different situations, it works fantastically. And I've done self-portrait work, animal work, landscape stuff, bears, horses, a good mixture of different things, and birds, and it's worked great. I've not noticed anything bad or anything that's skipped a focus or missed a shot because of it. It's all worked fine. The one time I did find it tricky was when I was trying to photograph a swallow, which is a bird flying around, nipping around really quickly, and I think the focus was just a bit slower. Again, I hadn't adjusted my autofocus settings in that moment, so that might have been on me, but that's the only time I did notice it was a little bit slower. But when I did take this camera abroad to Slovenia, I was photographing and filming bears, and actually the filming was great because it has the option of tracking subjects, which you hit your little button there, your little joystick, and it keeps hold of where that subject is. And the bear went behind the tree, the camera would still keep in focus of the bear when it came out behind the tree. So yeah, I was really impressed with the focusing I got with this and what it achieved. I wish I could do a bit more fast-paced photography, maybe of small birds, but overall I'm really pleased with how it performed, and I think it was fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so that just leaves me to summarize my experience, which has kind of been on and off over a month with the Fujifilm GFX 100S2. As I've mentioned, this was my first time shooting in a medium format camera and lenses. I hope you've enjoyed everything I've got with it. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I have to say I think this camera is incredible. I've loved the change in style in my photography, that different aspect and different vibe, and almost like a It does feel like an upgrade in my photography. Yeah, that's what it's felt like. And it's just been so nice to see. I love it when you can see growth with different equipment. And it's definitely felt like that with the GFX system. And I've just adored my time with it. And I just can't thank Fujifilm enough for letting me borrow it for the time I've used it for. And I just really hope I can showcase to you what is achievable with this camera. And it's been incredible. So I think the image quality and the perspective the medium format gives you, and obviously Fujifilm's wonderful color science, is just this match made in heaven with all of it. It's been stunning to work with. Obviously there is the price tag, and that's £5,000, nearly £1 off, £5,000, which is a lot of money. It is a lot. I can't personally afford that, and it's why I'm appreciative of Fuji for letting me borrow it, because this is the only way I'd have this camera in my hand, is if they let me borrow it. I'm just very mindful, obviously, the cost of that. But I think if you are someone who is a professional photographer and wants to get that high grade quality level of pictures, and say weddings, portraits, I don't know, landscapes or something like that, you definitely will make your money back, because they're stunning. They're absolutely stunning pictures. It's just whether you want to spend that amount of money. But if I had all the money in the world, I would swap, well, not swap, I probably would keep my X-H2S, because I really enjoy filming with my X-H2S, the slow motion side of things, the portability. But for photography, I think, yeah, this is a win for me, because it's beautiful. And yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me that, what do I prefer? And I don't know, because I actually love the whole of the Fujifilm series for different aspects and different things. So I think, yes, for photography, as I've said, this would be fantastic. But for filming, as I'm on right now looking at it, I love my X-H2S. I can't part from it. It's amazing. But as overall, this camera has performed incredibly. I hope you've enjoyed all the shots, all the footage. I've discussed everything I can that I've thought of. I couldn't really think of any cons apart from obviously the price and maybe the size for some people. But overall, I think Fuji have done a fantastic job with this camera. And actually they should be very proud of themselves, I think. Because I think we forget as consumers or customers that we buy these items and forget about all the work that goes into building something, the time, the technology, the effort. So yes, it does cost a lot. And someone asked me this recently, but I said, in some ways, so that is paying for the technology and everything to be developed and enhanced further, the research behind that. So yeah, it's just something to bear in mind. So well done, Fujifilm. I've loved the shots I've got with this. I love what you've done, and I really love this camera. So yeah, maybe I'll get to borrow it another time, but it's been a wonderful journey and a magical journey of that. And if you have the GFX system, or if you're looking at purchasing this, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions, let me know below. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching. And until next time, stay you, stay awesome, stay wild, and stay free. And until next time, you wonderful people, goodbye for now. Bye-bye. 1 second, I've forgotten already. What do we have? Where are we? Eric, there's a frog here. You can make friends. Make friends with the frog. Backside illuminated. Backside illuminated. I'm just gonna say sensor. Yay. Oh, the muffin. 3 minutes in and I've not even finished. Oh, whatever. Okay, the intermittent sunshine is winning it. So yes, they may be 200 megabytes worth of the sunshine. I just want to film about it. It's so bright. Ooh. Let me check. Don't want to say this wrong. I'll look at it. I'm sure it's up to 30. Yes. 29.97, whatever. So you can shoot in raw. Raw! It's raw! Oh, if you know, you know. Eric, come here, bud. Come here. Oh! I was like, oh yeah. Then you switch the flick. Switch the flick. Drive. And then all your autumn and it's raining. Wonderful.